Now listen to me, I heard you fellas brag about your music over here, and the girls you love so dear. They may be swell, that's all very well, with all their fancy clothes, but I'd have seen a fair saloon and sweeter than me rose. Oh, that is a...
In The Guns of August, a military history novel, Barbara W. Tuchman asserts that the bitter history between France and Germany would have assured the outbreak of World War I in 1914, irrespective of events traditionally associated with the start of the war, such as the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. An entangling alliance system, nationalistic desires, and territorial disputes all heavily influenced the start of the war. Furthermore, Tuchman suggests that over-reliance on morale, belief in a short war, and failure to consider treaty alliances resulted in a prolonged conflict costing many lives due to its reliance on trench warfare. Tuchman's decision to write in the form of a historical narrative reveals her intended audience of the general public. She intends to educate as many as possible about one of the most important wars in history. Also, Tuchman's focus on Europe and general exclusion of American involvement shows a worldwide audience as opposed to just the public of the United States. Her erudite and factual approach to the subject also shows she appeals to historians and students as well. The wide appeal of The Guns of August is clearly evidenced by its immediate status as a bestseller following publication. To prove her thesis, Tuchman provides strong evidence of the actions and doctrines of the leading figures of the Great War, and ties them to the outbreak and fighting of the war. By organizing her book chronologically, Tuchman clearly shows how a progression of events led to a war encompassing the whole world. This chronology clearly outlines Tuchman's thesis for the reader. The implied theory focuses on the failure of diplomatic leaders in avoiding a large-scale and bloody conflict, as well as the overall inevitability of the Great War. Guns of August focus primarily on the precipitating causes and opening events of World War I. Specifically, the book covers events from the death of King Edward VII of Britain up to the outbreak of war. As the title suggests, the most emphasis is placed on the month of August 1914. When reading this book, it is evident that Tuchman goes into the greatest detail when discussing this time period. The majority of her analysis centers on the time period before the actual military conflict begins. It is also important to note that The Guns of August focuses primarily on the Western Front, and conflict along the Eastern Front is entirely ignored. The majority of Tuchman's evidence deals with political and military leaders of the belligerents in the Great War, as well as how their doctrines and ideals contributed to the war. For example, Tuchman explores the rise of British Army Officer General Henry Wilson and his relationship with France in depth as a major cause of British involvement in World War I. By expanding on his relationship with French General Ferdinand Foch, Tuchman exposes Wilson's critical role in French-British relations, and an entangling alliance system that drew almost the whole of Europe into the war. Another one of Tuchman's most significant pieces of evidence was the concept of elan. This French military doctrine called for unbounding courage and belief in oneself that prompted over-aggressive attacks. This irrational confidence ultimately prompted stubborn adherence to ineffective battle plans that cost hundreds of thousands of lives for both sides. Tuchman effectively supports her thesis by providing evidence, usually the actions of political as well as military leaders. By describing in great detail the precipitating events of the war in chronological order, the build-up to the war is clearly revealed. For example, Tuchman clearly details the rise of British-French relations by relating chronologically the policies of the British War Board and the succession of its leaders. The factual nature of Tuchman's work, as well as her painstaking research, also helps to validate her argument. Tuckman's analysis of the actions of military and political leaders of the time suggests a question that is never stated outright. Could the scope and destruction of the Great War have been avoided by the leading figures? Although Tuckman never answers this question explicitly, her narrative clearly provides an answer. In her preface, Tuckman mentions that she personally witnessed one of the events discussed in the book, the pursuit of the German ship Goeben. The author relates her traumatic story and how the German ambassador at Constantinople had questioned her mother unrelentlessly about the event. This experience agrees with Tuckman's slight bias against the Germans. She tends to paint Germany as the aggressor in the war and seems sympathetic to the plight of France. Tuckman also sympathizes with those who have suffered in the war, as she implies that loss of life could and should have been avoided. Tuckman's bibliography contains many reputable and reliable sources, including several official government publications. These include significant military and political documents from the time period, such as papers relating to the foreign relationship of the U.S. supplements from the United States Department of State. The majority of her sources are published works from the time period of 1910 to 1930, or around the time period of World War I. This makes her sources very reliable. If research on World War I was needed, I would recommend this book to be looked at. The book contains in-depth analysis of the precipitating causes of World War I, as well as its early stages. This work would most likely be useful to students as opposed to historians or teachers, who would likely prefer resources encompassing more of the war. However, The Guns of August could aid any person researching the causes of World War I or its dominant personalities. When published in 1962, The Guns of August immediately emerged as a bestseller and received the Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction the next year. The book is said to have profoundly influenced U.S. President John F. Kennedy and even his foreign policy. In general, the work of Tuckman has been lauded by historians as well as critics, and her painstaking research has withstood the test of time. 50 years after publication, The Guns of August remains a book commonly cited as one of the premier and respectable historical accounts of World War I. Besides The Guns of August, Barbara Tuckman authored several other historical novels, though none were as successful. In 1958, she published The Zimmerman Telegram. As the title suggests, the book focused on the Zimmerman Telegram in 1917, a key incident involving Germany and Mexico that helped provoke the U.S. into entering World War I. Tuckman passed away on February 6, 1989, and will always be remembered as a celebrated American historian and author.